Well, welcome everyone. I think you already, those of you who are looking to submit a proposal to the challenge, meet the requirement of being intrepid, so fearless people walking through the snow to come here. So thank you for doing that. Thank you also, Madeleine, for coming in this weather to help us understand what cultural entrepreneurship is all about when it actually comes to doing it.
Getting out in the snow.
Yes, it partly involves getting across in the snow. What I'm going to do today is, because we originally had planned for two people to discuss some of these questions, what I'll do is we want to get Madeleine's view on it, but I'll also try to present some of the things that I have learned on the basis of studying a lot of these cultural entrepreneurs who might be doing slightly different things, either in terms of content or format or business model, etc., from what Madeleine is doing, so that you get actually a broader perspective on the things the way we intended it to happen. So we'll start by actually just getting an idea, if anyone is willing, and I know the names of some people in the room, so I can cold call. If anyone is willing, I just want to hear if there's any existing ideas about who a cultural entrepreneur is, and what are the kinds of things they do, what are the things that you think you want to do as a cultural entrepreneur. If no one raises their hand, I just use my professorial mandate to cold call. Kelly. You knew I was going to go tell us something.
So I guess the way I think about it for myself is that I like the idea of kind of democratizing creativity. So how can an entrepreneur start something that allows people to express their creative side in some sense or appreciate others?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So in some ways, gaining access to or providing access to the creative output. Anyone else? That's actually a nice segue to what Madeleine does. So let me get her to talk a little bit about what ZUMIX does. You have the website opened up on the screens here. But tell us a little bit, and then we can try and get deeper into what this means.
Sure. So thanks for having me out this evening, and I was actually really pleased that the ride wasn't so bad getting over here. I live and work in a neighborhood called East Boston. It is over near Logan International Airport, the furthest east you can get and still be in the city.
Did you switch on the mic?
I did, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Can people hear me okay? Okay, good. And I am I'm co-founder and executive director of the organization called ZUMIX. I started it in 1991, basically in an effort to address the issue of violence in the city. And it's interesting to have been invited here to speak as a cultural entrepreneur because most often, or most recently, we've really been labeled more of a social entrepreneur. And I think that the reality is that we're working at the intersection of, of two basic principles, I guess. One is that art is powerful, and allowing young people in particular to express themselves through art is a really powerful way of giving young people a voice. But also that connecting young people, and even not so young people, to the issues within their neighborhood, and encouraging them to be part of the solution of the issues in that neighborhood is also really vital in terms of being able to change the trajectory of what was happening in our city, certainly back in 1990. So the premise for this organization, well, first of all, it wasn't ever meant to be an organization. It was meant to be a summer project. That was the summer of 1991. And the idea was to reach out to a small cohort of kids and get them involved in a music program for the summer that begged them to look at the question of youth violence in the city and to envision a brighter future for the city and to use music as a tool to express their vision. And when we ended up recruiting these kids, they really had no previous background or understanding of how to do anything musical, but they had a passion for it. And so we discovered a lot that first summer of how little access young people had to the arts within the school systems. And it wasn't even just the arts. I mean, science classes were really pretty devastating. Like they're just learning about how resources had been sort of truncated and how little access kids had to getting their hands onto things and learning in a really proactive way. So that began a process of working with young people in a format that was looking at their personal development, their artistic development, and their civic engagement. And so those are the three lenses that we were looking at. Fast forward to today, we're servicing over 1,000 kids a year. We have a number of things to point to as really incredible outcomes, both in terms of the impact that we're having on the kids that we're servicing, but also the fact that we've been working in this funny little neighborhood of East Boston for so long. And we've continued to try and be part of the glue and like creating a fabric of a neighborhood where people who wouldn't normally cross paths, that the arts is an introduction to people sort of across demographics, et cetera. So it's been really an honor to work in that sphere. And as you can see, so our mission is up on the website here. So the mission is, and it's a little funny how it's written, but it was intentional at the time, even though we were always like grammatically like challenged on it. But empowered youth who use music to make a strong positive change in their lives, their communities, and the world. And it's been interesting in the last couple of years that we are really trying to get at the final statement in that, which is really what's the ripple effect. When you work with kids over 23 years, we've served thousands and thousands of kids. They're out in the world now doing things, and yet they're still connected by this unified sort of experience. What does that mean for our neighborhood, but what does it mean for the broader world? So that's a quick introduction. I don't know if people have questions.
We'll open it up to questions in just a bit. But as I was thinking about this, and as I was going through the website, you mentioned you had a ZUMIX is a nonprofit. You'd had a capital campaign a few years ago. I'm wondering, because this is something that a lot of the participants here will be doing, which is to pitch this idea, right, and try and find support for it. What were the three key things maybe that you made sure to clarify when you did the fundraising? What was
for the capital campaign or for the organization?
For the capital campaign. What were the things about the organization that you would emphasize in your plea for funds? So our capital campaign was to buy and then fully renovate a beautiful but really run-down former city-owned firehouse. And so it was a disaster when we got it, but it had it was oozing potential. So in the capital campaign, part of the challenge was to take something that had been boarded up for 30 years and to allow people to envision it lit up and allow it to to have a rebirth. So part of that was looking at need and how we were going to utilize it. And so I think that, again, just like the spoonfuls or the sound bites, if you want to call it that, that helped us articulate why this capital campaign was necessary. We were serving at the time 350 kids a year. We had 450 kids on our waiting list. And so to tell young people that they had to wait 2, 3, sometimes 4.5 years to be able to do something that they are interested in doing is a heartbreaking thing to have to do. And yet we did have kids who were waiting for 4 years to get into our programs. Not every program, but the more popular programs, it just, they were full. And so that was one issue. And sometimes you would lose kids in that process because they aren't that patient, and I don't blame them. So we were often trying to tell kids about other programs and other things that they could do, but regardless, that was one of the pieces of information that was important.
Another piece of information that was important is that we were watching our neighborhood go through a bit of a gentrification. So there were, real estate prices were going up. We were afraid that after close to 20 years in a neighborhood that we could be left homeless as an institution. So we were looking at trying to create stability for an organization that had been born in that neighborhood and wanted to continue to be in that neighborhood. So that was a second major point. The third one was taking what had been a public building and making sure that it remained in the public sphere. So there was a lot of interest in this building. It was a beautiful building. It's a great location. And some of the ideas that people had in terms of how to utilize this space, people wanted to make private homes, people wanted to make condos, they wanted to make a sports bar, they wanted to make an art gallery. So the articulation of vision of like being able to open that building up so that young people had a safe place to go after school, on the weekends, during the summer times to educate themselves, and then in the evening to have it be open to the broader community was another pitch. It was also, we were very lucky to have partnered with the East Boston Community Development Corporation, which is another long-term East Boston entity that had 35 years of experience developing buildings. So we had 15 years of experience working with young people, and they had real estate experience. So those two things made us a good dynamic duo.
I just want to point out to anyone who is listening and reading at the same time that basically Madeleine has covered exactly the kind of things that we are looking for in the judging through the judging metrics when we will be looking at your proposals. So in terms of the team and the resources that you have already, the partnering with a credible partner that was seen as actually being able to have the impact that is necessary, showing the impact of the venture. There it is back. It seemed to have these magical effects. Showing the impact of the venture on the target market, so to speak, which was the youth market in Madeleine's case, showing that this was going to be scalable, sustainable, and therefore something worth supporting. All of these things are exactly what Madeleine talked about just now, and so I just want to again stress that as you walk through, as you listen to Madeleine and just think about what she's talking about in terms of running the organization, having come up with the idea, etc., it would be really worthwhile to keep also at the back of your mind, not because we want you to write the proposal just to meet these metrics, but because these are, we have found, and as she has shown, these are the things that make a strong and powerful organization that can have the kind of impact on the production, distribution, and consumption of cultural goods and arts and artistic products. So I think this is important to keep in mind, and that's why I've pulled it up. But thank you. Sure. Without my having prepped you on these metrics specifically, you exactly hit all of the points there. Having a plan for what you're actually going to do with the money that you would get, that you're asking for. All of these are really, really important things. But one of the things that we talk about here is that there isn't a single way of organizing, especially in terms of either for-profit or not-for-profit. I would love to hear, for some of these participants here, they may be on this trying to decide what makes sense. Mm-hmm. When you were doing this, maybe not at the very beginning when it was going to be a summer project, but when it was going to be an organization, did you weigh the for-profit, not-for-profit model? Did you ever think about it?
We actually never thought about it at the beginning. Mm-hmm. At the beginning, it was actually just a volunteer project, and right. we never really even anticipated it being, our jobs. We really were doing it. We did it for the first 3 years as volunteers, and all of the people engaged for the first 3 years were all volunteers. I think, we had a bunch of parties to raise money to buy supplies and things like that. But it had such a sort of pure charitable original sort of intent, that there was nothing else that it could have been incorporated as, because we didn't even begin thinking about money and probably until, except with the exception of having money to buy supplies. And literally supplies to begin with were like pens and pencils, cassette tapes, it was way back when, things like that. We really didn't have a large budget or any of that kind of thing. However, I will say that having gone through this over the years and looking at it from hindsight, I think it's a really important question to ask. And I've had the benefit of working with some really amazing board members, one of whom I truly miss because he's not currently on my board, but he's the longest standing board member that I ever had, and is a social activist, a musician, a hilarious man and brilliant man. But he would always push me to look at the structure in terms of the way the nonprofit, like the whole sort of nonprofit sort of premise is that you're doing charitable work that is having a positive impact on society, and therefore you're getting a tax break for doing it, that all of the monies that are made will be reinvested into the mission, so nobody's, quote, getting rich off of it or whatever. And all of that is beautiful, but he also, with that, there's like so much sort of regulatory things, reporting that needs to be done, and evaluation that needs to be done, and proof that what you're doing has that kind of impact and that pure center. That his take on it, from a kind of more radical perspective, was that the structure existed to keep progressive-minded people so busy reporting on things that they couldn't actually work towards their mission, or it would like lessen their impact, and that they'd just be like pushing paperwork around. And I used to be like, oh yeah, shut up about that. And now I'm like pulling my hair out because there's so much communication, there's so much reporting, there's so much there are so many requirements that really, they are important, and I see them as important, but they assume that you went into this to do social science work, and we're not paid or funded to do social science work. So it's a whole different thing. Now, one of the first women that I ever hired as an instrumental instructor, when she stepped down, she worked for us for like 9 years or something. When she stepped down, she was looking to have a child, and she wanted to work really part-time and from home. And she ended up starting a music school in Jamaica Plain, and she intentionally started it as a for-profit, but with really low cost. And so it was like a for-profit with nonprofit basic principles. And the reason she did it was that it was easier for her to pay taxes and just sort of like make her money, pay her taxes, and be done with it, rather than go through the grant writing, the report writing, the logic model designs, and all the other things that have to be there to sort of bolster your arguments.
So I mean, I think I just again want to just stress this this point. I find it difficult to talk sitting down.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I'm sorry, I can't see you guys. People over there.
That nonprofit doesn't mean loss making. Doesn't mean that you have to necessarily sit there and not try and not make money. There are situations where, especially if you're selling a product of some sort, there are situations where it would actually make more sense to be a for-profit organization. So think about that. Also understand that one of the things we are looking for with the challenge is ideas that look sustainable.
I have a question about the challenge, though. Would the money still be made available whether the proposal was for-profit or not?
Yeah.
Interesting.
If you're if you're one of the finalists, I mean, it's a prize. So
no, I realize that. I'm just saying, like, in my world, like, if we were for profit, then we don't have access to all of the funding mechanisms.
No, this is not like that. So think about that. That one of the goals is to examine the sustainability of the organization, and what does that mean? So it means that there needs to be some sense that the judges get when they look at your proposal, about what it is, how is it that you're going to be sustainable? So is there some sort of cash flow coming in, and that you have some plan for actually keeping it coming in? And this can be done if you're a for-profit or not-for-profit. With a not-for-profit, as Madeleine said, you would have to acknowledge the fact that you might be in some sort of fundraising mode if necessary, and in that case, how are you going to keep that fundraising going, right? Or are you actually instead going to raise the money or get money by only adopting the sort of legal structure of a not-for-profit for various reasons, if it seems the right thing, but actually going to make money by selling something, getting people to pay you for what you do, either in terms of services or products. So I want to emphasize that not-for-profit does not mean that you can't be selling something. You might be able to, you could be selling stuff and like I said, services or products, but but putting back all the money into the organization and not having, showing a profit per se, and that would be seen as a sustainable plan if you have your right revenue models. But you can also do this in a for-profit model. So keep that again in mind, that the idea that we are looking for is sustainability. It's to try and see if we can get a lot of the organizations that operate in this space out of the sort of the treadmill of fundraising and being uncertain about where the next amount of support, either tangible or intangible, is going to come from. So that's something to definitely keep in mind. What would you, in terms of, so you're working on one side, Madeleine, of the challenge that we talk about, which is the increasing the interaction and impact of interaction between arts and the arts and artists and society, and increasing their chances of art having an impact on society.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever thought about ideas for, doing something much more on the other end of taking artists and finding them audiences, trying to be on the production of some sort of artistic and cultural products?
So yes, we do a little bit of both. If I understand the question correctly, I'm not sure. Forgive me if I don't. But so for those of you, again, just sort of I'm doing sort of thumbnails of what we do. So we started off doing direct youth service, and that was a lot of intense group work with young people, with music as a tool to do sort of social action work. It started off with a lot of songwriting programming and performance-based programs, all for free for kids to participate, and performances were all done for free, and performances were all done either within our community or out in other youth communities. So it was really about giving young people a voice. But we've been doing this now for so long, and we have so many young people involved, that we've got a number of extremely talented musicians who are working with us. And so we have a combination of adult staff who are amazing and young people who are amazing. And we have a beautiful space now. We've got a recording studio, we have a radio station, we have a performance space. And so there's a lot of different ways in which we are our primary service population is still young people. We're still primarily doing out of school time stuff, although we do have 2 school partnerships. So we're doing some stuff in the middle school and the high school in our neighborhood as well. But we also have a venue, so we do some presenting. We have some beautiful outdoor spaces, so we do some presenting out in our community. We are in the things that we're doing indoors as presenting. We are trying to, do what any theater company would be trying to do, which is to fill the house and sell tickets and market that and create a reputation for ourselves as a place that presents things that are excellent and meaningful to our constituency. So we're, playing with that and doing the best we can. And then we're also, our kids are being hired now to go out and perform at all different kinds of events, and are being, we're being paid for that, they're being paid for that. Our staff are being, hired to go do contract work with other organizations sometimes. So there are a lot of ways in which the idea of promoting artists or supporting and promoting artists, whether they be youth artists or adult artists, creeps into our work. It's not our primary work, but it's there as part of it. I will say that one of the things that I really appreciate about working in the nonprofit sector, and it's probably true in the for-profit sector too, but I haven't been in that, so I don't have that experience, is I'm really interested in what the logic behind the work is, and because you have to sell your plan to a third party to fund it, you constantly have to be looking at those sort of logical explanations as to why. Why should something cost this much, or why do you want to do this thing or invest here or what have you? And I really find, to me, I'm like, I want to break it down so that a fifth grader would understand that logic. Like, I just want it to be that simple, even if it's a complex organism with multiple ways of looking at it. You should be able to articulate most of what you do so that it is that simple. Because the basic core principles are that simple. So I really enjoy trying to take a complex problem and literally explain it to the kids that come in, or explain it to, my board members who aren't in this realm. I had a board member once ask me, we were looking at our financials, and he was seeing that our instrumental music classes were losing money. And he's like, well, how can we afford to do this? I mean, if we're paying our teachers this much, we're paying our teachers this amount per hour, and our kids are only paying a third of that. Like, I don't get it. The business model doesn't work. And I was like, you really don't get it, because everything that we do, it, quote, loses money because it's all funded from a third source, right? So you've got your population that you're serving, you've got your funders who are investing in that, and then you've got your sort of staff and mission who are providing the service. So there's always that triangulation and trying to make sure that there's a balance in that.
On the thing of, both sides, the question that I had asked earlier.
Yeah, the for-profit is a direct, there's usually not a third party. So the for-profit's like, you're providing a service, somebody pays for the service, or you're providing a product, somebody pays for the product, and you're going to be looking at what the market will bear. I do have questions about, so one of a woman who I actually just had dinner with the other night was my program director for a long time and has recently moved on and is now the executive director of another nonprofit. And it's fascinating to sit down and chat with her about the model that they run and the model that we run, because we're both in youth arts. But their model, 75% of what they do is funded through earned revenue. And in our model, 10% of what we do is funded through earned revenue. And so in looking at that, like, they are hired to bring service to populations that will pay for that.
Right.
And we are bringing service to populations that can't pay for it directly. So we are dependent on third parties. So when you're talking about sustainability, on some levels, our model is not sustainable. Like, if you just look at that and say, like, we are in the business of doing two things, providing all that service and raising money. And we marry that. We know that those are the two businesses that we're in, and we have to do it, and we want to be successful at both. Whereas she's more in the realm of having to have an excellent service or product or whatever, and really good marketing, and she's more of a salesperson than in that relationship, right?
Right.
So.
Right. And on the as you mentioned, you do a bit of the helping artists reach audiences, but you also do the helping art have an impact on society. If you had to suggest things to participants here, and I know it's probably hard to pick one. It's like asking a parent to pick their favorite child. But do you think which area do you think is more ripe for young people coming in and doing something to change status quo?
I don't know that I can answer that question.
I knew
honestly,
that
because
I shouldn't have given you that parent
I will say,
analogy.
no, it's not that. It's not that one is that I like one more than the other or anything. I have to say, I think it's a very interesting and somewhat uncertain time in Boston right now, at least in my view of this. So there's the nonprofit sector, then there's the philanthropic sector, which is a combination of big public foundations or private foundations, and then lots of family foundations, and then there's corporate giving. There is some governmental funding, not a whole lot, but there's some. And then there's individuals and that kind of thing, events, whatever. So there's if you look at our financials, I should have brought them, I should have shared them with you, but I don't have them. I don't think I have them. Maybe I could bring them up. But you look at all the different ways in which you can raise money or bring in revenue, and then you look at all of the ways that you want to spend your money. And in what seems uncertain to me right now is particularly the philanthropic world. That, and I don't know that this should, you're filming this, so I'm just going to go ahead and say it, but don't hold it against me, people. I am uncertain as to where some of the larger philanthropic entities in Boston are at right now in terms of their ability to continue to give and also their sort of mission-centric direction. It seems like a lot of them have been they've had a lot of staff turnover. They're re-evaluating their focus. So the kind of pillars in philanthropic giving that for 15 years as we were growing up, you could kind of count on, not necessarily to fund you, but you knew what they stood for and you knew what they were capable of doing, and you knew that if you presented yourself in a good light, you at least had a chance of getting supported from them. It feels very unstable right now. I'm not really sure what's happening with all of that leadership. One major foundation just actually closed their offices in the last couple of weeks, and that's unfortunately, it was due to some of the Ponzi scheme stuff that happened a while back, and that's just a really sad reality because I think they had real true intentions to have a positive impact on this city, and they've been forced to do this thing that's really sad. But so the philanthropic world is feeling a little bit shaky. Simultaneously, I'm seeing a bigger divide in Boston between the haves and the have-nots. So the middle class is seeming sort of smaller and torn, and yet I'm seeing more and more extremely, extremely high-end restaurants and fancy housing all over the city. So there's a lot more wealth in our city, and yet there's also more poverty and more struggling in our city. And there's also the reality that a lot of people have chosen to leave our city because they can't afford to live here anymore. So if you look at places like Quincy, a lot of people who used to live in South Boston, and it was working class people who lived in South Boston, are living in Quincy. So Quincy is now having this kind of amazing boom in terms of population, but has all sorts of different people living there than they did 10, 15 years ago. So Boston's a strange place right now to be doing anything. Actually, maybe not.
Which means it's actually exciting that almost anything you do will have some impact.
I feel like it's a good
Although
time to be
not all of them will be limited to Boston. So
in a way, and I don't know what I'm talking about, so you guys can all correct me, but it feels like a ripe time to be doing innovative for-profit work, and yet that's not the business I'm in.
Right.
And so, but I also don't know that world, so maybe I'm totally wrong. And it's probably extremely competitive anyway.
Yeah.
But the nonprofit sector, the part of it that I know about, I'll give you an example. So our budget right now is just over $1 million a year. 10% of that comes through earned income, so I know that we can count on $100,000 a year coming in through earned revenue. Probably another 10% of that comes from individual gifts or so, and I don't know that we can count on that, but I'm pretty confident. So my guess is going into any fiscal year, I know that we can count on about $250,000 to sort of somewhat naturally come in. I mean, it's work, but it will come in. Yeah. $750,000 to $850,000 we need to raise every year. The majority of that is going to be through private foundations. In order to do that, we need to be requesting 3 to 4 times as much as that to be able to bring that money in. And we need to be reporting on every dollar we raise. So it's, when I say that we're in both businesses, it's a ton of work, and it's nonstop. And that it's sustainable if you build it into your model. So I have a grant writer now who does their grant writing, and I have an individual gifts and events person who does that. So I have 2 development staff to keep us afloat at just over $1 million. I keep looking at Lori because she has also been in this world, and if there, at any point you want to jump in and share your experience, come right on up here, because there were supposed to be 2 of us. Okay.
And how important is it to have a passion for, an interest in, for in your case, music? Or is it more important to have that passion and interest in the youth aspect and the society aspect?
I think it's important to have passion for what you're doing, period. And you can, I have developed, like I came into this with a real passion for music, passion for youth, and an interest in being purposeful in my life. So I wanted to serve and just figure out how I could spend my time being of service and of value to other people. I think that's because I was brought up in a family, like my mom died when I was really little, and I was just always having to be in that nurturing role regardless. I raised my little sister, I kind of raised my father. So that's just sort of what I was taught to do. And the joy in my job comes out of 2 things. Seeing young people just like in that moment when they have mastered something, even if it's a little something, but in that moment when they've mastered something that they couldn't do 2 weeks ago and they're super proud of themselves, that's extremely joyful. And then seeing young people perform or present something, not only that they're proud of, but that the audiences are just like really like upholding those things are incredible. So I feel like, and those kinds of things. And then also just the little things of like when you work with adolescents, it's such a raw, emotionally raw time to be alive. And so you just get to relive that over and over again, and it's just awesome because everything is kind of with new eyes. So that's just a beautiful part of my job. It's also extremely distracting. Like when you're going to get your work done, you get in early, do your work, and then you're kind of available for young people in the afternoon. But yeah, I do think I also truly enjoy the fact that I've had to learn about financial management and capitalization and marketing and social media and like the whole 9 because we're underfunded, so everybody has to do everything. It's really cool.
So let's open it up to questions with just one quick, before anyone else asks it, one piece of advice for anyone here planning to actually put in a proposal. What in your mind would make the punchiest proposal out there?
So this is under cultural entrepreneurship, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to say. I think that it's marrying whatever need that you've articulated with whatever service you want to deliver. So, and finding really interesting ways to talk about it. I know, like ZUMIX struggles with the fact that a lot of times people want to paint us as a music school, and that's how like people want to describe us, and we don't consider ourselves a music school. And yes, we teach music, we teach all different aspects of music, but we really are trying to create a community of learning, which is very different than a school in many ways, or at least with the, like connotations of a school, particularly if you happen to be 15, may not be the place you want to hang out after school, right? So it's important, language is important in terms of how you describe what you do. But I guess I think the most important thing is to really be passionate about what you want to do so that when you're describing it, people will feel that. And so there has to be some center of like, you're excited and you love the concept of it. Because you're going to have to convince a bunch of people that what you want to do is going to be awesome and it's going to be possible, and that with a little bit of help from them, you're going to move mountains.
And I do want to stress that the passion part does go a long way in convincing people. I have sat in meetings where definitely people have thought about the sort of the notion that companies have, which is to to hire for attitude and then train for skills, right? Which is very similar, where people look at people pitching ideas and say, yes, maybe the cash flow statement isn't down to the last 5 decimal points or whatever it is for 5 years down the line, but I can see that this person has a lot of passion for this idea and would be willing to work with me to maybe get it to that level of detail and precision and absolute focus. So I want to stress that the passion is really important. And then the other side of it, which is that if you're not clear about what you're doing and how you're doing it, nobody else will be. So it doesn't matter that you have a lot of passion, but if you can't clearly articulate in that proposal for the time being, for the purposes of this challenge, what exactly you are doing, then maybe go back, think about whether you understand what it is that you're doing and how you're going to achieve that thing that makes you so passionate and makes you so interested in doing something, and then rewrite the proposal and then send it to us. So be very clear about the means and ends, the goals, and how to convey that passion with the right language. So I'll open it up to questions for Madeleine as well as me, I guess. But let's, if there's very specific things about the challenge logistics, then keep it for offline and maybe ask Megan later. But if there's anything, I would love for everyone to take advantage of having Madeleine here to actually get her perspective on things.
I didn't know how many people are going to be here, so I'm sorry. I have our latest annual report, if anybody wants to look at it. And I also have some gifts. If anybody's a musician, I've got ZUMIX guitar picks, and I've got ZUMIX pins if anybody's interested.
That's
so
cool.
You're welcome to have those. And thank you, guys.
I think Megan has a mic.
Anybody have questions? Please ask me some questions. I came all the way over here in the snow. Yes, please do.
And actually, this is a question I ask a lot of our social entrepreneurs as well, as you are as well. Can you just talk a little bit about your notion of scalability? And I'm curious if anyone's ever asked you to expand ZUMIX to other cities. I think it's something that we wrestle here a lot, particularly with our social entrepreneurs. Here we are in an incubator where we have technology business scaling going around the world, and you can do that with social businesses, with cultural businesses, but you don't always have to, and it's not always the best move. So I'm curious if you can talk about why you chose to stay in East Boston, if you've ever wrestled with that decision to go bigger.
Yes, thank you. So yes, we have, how do I begin? So I actually really love small. I love small group work. I love intimacy. I like the idea of having an impact on a small group of people and truly believing that an impact on 5 people is going to have an impact on the world. So that's really awesome. And then at the other end of that, I really want to reach out and serve as many young people as we can do and do well. So there's been a little bit of a tension between those two things. We're working in East Boston. I mean, really, so many things in my life have kind of like fallen into place in front of me that I have to believe that there might be some greater power out there or something. We're working in East Boston because that's where my partner ended up living when we started having these dinner table conversations about if you could do anything in your life and didn't have to worry about paying bills or making money, like what would you do? What would be your calling? And those questions really were the spark of the work around getting involved in purposeful work, getting involved in something that would have an impact on society, wanting to work with young people, wanting to work in the arts, wanting to be joyful when you went to work, and like at the end of the day feel like you had accomplished something worthwhile, all those kinds of things. So it's not that we chose East Boston because of the demographics or because of the issues we were living there. And then it turns out to have been an extremely interesting place to work, partially because of its history and partially because of its geography. So it is a neighborhood of the city of Boston, so it's part of the large city, but it is cut off from the rest of the city by the Boston Harbor, so it functions as if it were Martha's Vineyard. Not in like economics, but it functions like a small island. It really functions like you have an island mentality that you need to care for each other, you need to look out for each other, you need to fight with each other, you need to, like, everything is right there. It's a small, tiny microcosm. And that's been really interesting to do community and social kinds of work there because of that. So I loved where we landed, but it was something that brought us there,
Yeah.
you know. And then the idea of expansion, we have tried to expand slowly since we started. We started with 24 kids. The next year we were working with 34 kids. Then we were working at 50 kids, then 75 kids. So it's like slowly and slowly, just with our ability to absorb them and to continue to evolve both the culture and the programs, so that it's grown very slowly and has morphed to be about what all of us make it. There's only been one time in our history so far that we have very seriously considered opening a second location, because it's not my intention to just like take over the world. It's my intention to do good work wherever good work needs to be done and makes sense. And we were approached by a gentleman who was considering purchasing a building in Upham's Corner in Dorchester, and the idea for purchasing that building was that he wanted to make this building into a kind of mecca for musicians, where it would have rehearsal spaces on the upper floors, a recording studio on one floor, a radio station, and then they wanted the basement, which had extremely high ceilings and wasn't actually, it sounds terrible, but it wasn't a terrible space. It was actually a pretty nice space. They wanted the basement to have a youth component, like youth development component. And so they asked us to come in and to potentially partner with them. And we did a lot of really serious looking at that neighborhood and at what our structure was and how our structure could be taken to a new neighborhood and how it would be the same, but how it would be different. And it was actually really exciting, and I believe that we have a model that could be replicated. And so I'm excited about that potential sometime. But the only reason we were really looking at that is because we had all of these partners that would make that a really viable option. And I honestly thought about my life too in it. I'm like, oh my God, that means my job will be running from one location to the next. I'm gonna be sitting in traffic on 93 on a cell phone trying to solve problems. It's gonna be terrible. But if we could serve twice as many young people, if we could have an impact on the Upham's Corner neighborhood, which has a lot of issues, if we could still stay strong in East Boston, it would be really exciting. That project fell apart because the gentleman who was going to buy the building and do all these other musical things with it ended up getting divorced, a million different things happened, and his project fell apart. So we were like, well, we don't have any interest in just like going to Dorchester and trying on our own. It's just if the partnerships exist. We are now sort of facing an interesting, almost like a next generation dilemma, which is that we have produced and are continuing to produce a cohort of alumni that are just brilliant, that are invested in our mission, that want to plug back in. They want to be purposeful with their lives, and they have a cross-section of skills and a connection to our organization that could make them viable players in a second site. And yet right now we are treading water because we did a strategic plan, and essentially all agreed that after 3 years of significant growth after our capital campaign and moving into our new building, that it would make sense to try and plateau at this size and make sure that we're managing well at this size and that we're strong at this size, and to go deeper with the kids that we have now and just sort of solidify and then think about, do we stay at this size or do we want to do something different? So we're in the second year of a 3-year plan. That's sort of the treading water plan. It's actually harder to tread water and raise money for that than it is to like have some big idea that you want to do, but I think it's smart. So that's what we're doing right now.
Cool.
More questions, please, please, please.
Yeah, I got a question. I got 2 questions actually. Number one, Madeleine, you mentioned 2 things that really piqued my interest. Number one, you said the economic disparity that you're seeing a little bit in Boston, the maybe polarity of wealth or the wealth transfer. It seems like the more the middle class and lower class are growing in numbers, which may increase the need for nonprofit services. Can you comment on that, number one? And number two, you mentioned that foundations are becoming more conflicted on what they do. Is there any reason for that? Are they looking for more accountability or better governance models, more strategy from nonprofits in general, or are they just looking to use their money for other possible reasons? So if you remember those two questions, I'd appreciate
I'll
it.
try. So the first question has to do with economic disparity and just sort of a growing need for services. Yeah, I guess in my neighborhood right now, and so I live in a neighborhood within a neighborhood. So I live in the neighborhood of East Boston, which is part of the city, but I live in the Jeffreys Point section of East Boston, which is right now is considered sort of a hot neighborhood, and it's never has been. Actually, you know, in I think in 1993 there was a big article written about my neighborhood in the Boston Globe that essentially called it like the armpit of the city. Like it was just a nasty place to live, and that they were disparaging our neighborhood pretty terribly. And you know, when I look back at old photographs of our neighborhood, we did, and just remember what it was like. There was a lot of empty commercial space. There were a lot of empty apartments. It was a depressed economy. It was associated with being that little swath of, like, crappy little swath of land right next to Logan Airport. Like, who would ever want to live there? And there are issues about living right next to an airport. Many of those issues they try and keep under the radar. So there's air quality issues, and as much as we try and have environmental impact studies that are made public to everybody, a lot of that is actually suppressed and not made public. There have been some reports that we can't get access to the issue of like why there's higher rates of asthma in my neighborhood or things like that. But there were some major infrastructural changes that happened in East Boston that have made it a much nicer place to live. One of which is the Ted Williams Tunnel. So we used to only have one tunnel, which meant that coming and going from East Boston was extremely, like, you had to add a half an hour time frame to any time you wanted to leave the neighborhood because you knew you were going to sit in traffic. And now, like, it took me 15 minutes to get here, and it's the other side of the city. It's much easier to get to and from. So the extra tunnel made it more desirable. The renovation of the Blue Line, we've got 5 subway stops in East Boston. So essentially any place you live in East Boston is within 10-minute walking distance of the T, mostly within 5 minutes walking distance of the T. And they've renovated all of the lines, and we have new trains now. So what used to be like an oozing, disgusting, gross experience to come and go, because we had the oldest like subway lines pretty much in the city, have all been spruced up, and it's a nicer experience to go to and from work or what have you. I think the biggest thing, honestly, is the development of Pierce Park, which is a waterfront park that was developed out of, it was mitigation money from Massport, so sort of to pay for all of the negative impacts that the airport has had and to deal with a lot of lawsuits and things that the community had put forth in Massport. They ended up working with the neighborhood to develop I think, the most beautiful park in the city. And it has like the skyline of Boston. I mean, like the skyline of Boston. It's gorgeous, and it's the nicest view anywhere, and the park is beautiful. And that has made living in East Boston, not just that park, but our amount of new green space has like quadrupled, and it's really made it a nicer place. So in my neighborhood, I'm seeing way more wealthy people move into the neighborhood than I've ever seen before, and I'm really concerned about East Boston's place in history, that it has been a starting place for young families, a starting place for immigrants, a starting place for undocumented folks who were trying to get their foot like on solid ground and build a better future for themselves. And it could do that because it was close to downtown, accessible by the T, relatively speaking, a safe neighborhood, and affordable. And now it is slowly, actually not so slowly, becoming not affordable. So my concern is that we're getting more and more people with resources and with access, squeezing out particularly immigrant populations that don't have those kinds of resources, or they're just, you know, squirreling up so that 10 people are living in a 2-bedroom apartment or whatever. And that's just putting more pressure on the thing. So I believe that if you can articulate the service population that you want to work with and the need that's there, the need is there. But as people leave the city, the need is now in Quincy too. So, you know, I think that's sort of a question. That was the first question. What's the second question?
Foundations.
Oh, about the foundations.
Why are they doing what they're doing? Why are they doing?
Again, help me if you want to. I will start with the family foundations. a lot of family foundations that exist in Boston have been here for a while and are run by the sort of matriarchs and patriarchs of the families, let's say. So a family that made lots of wealth 100 years ago and is now happy to be charitable with that and set up a foundation and have guidelines and everything. They're all doing that and they're happy to do that, but many of those family foundations are trying to pass the baton to the next generation of leaders, and in doing that are doing strategic planning with those leaders. And so people who are in their 40s maybe are coming in to try and understand philanthropy and try and balance their lives as professional working people with a responsibility of giving. And they might have different things that they're interested in. So I think part of it is just the natural cycle of, family foundations can fund whatever charitable cause they want to. So if a parent wanted to do, I don't know, if they wanted to do music education and then the next generation wants to do like environmental justice work, it's awesome, it's totally great, but it no longer is necessarily what we do, so we might not qualify, but somebody who does environmental justice will be thrilled, right? So there's that sort of change of generational leadership. From the more like community foundation set, so the Boston Foundation, I wasn't going to label them, but the Boston Foundation has had an enormous amount of staff changes recently. And with that, I think has, I'm not on the inside, so I'm not really sure. You should invite the Boston Foundation in. You should invite the Boston Foundation honestly, you should invite them in to talk about what they do, because if you're exploring this field, you really should. But what I would say from my perspective is that, they exist as a community foundation. They're meant to invest in things that help the social fabric of the city and make it a healthy, broadly speaking, a healthy city to live in. Needs change and people advocating for things change. They had a change in leadership over the last 5 or so years, maybe it's even been longer than that, which made a ripple effect, so a lot of the different positions changed, and that brought in new energy and new ideas, so there's that. But I also think that somewhere inside me, and this again may or may not be true, but I believe that the philanthropic world is scared about the lack of resources that they have power over at this point. We've had a recession. Mostly the money that they're giving away is a percentage on whatever interest they would have made on their invested monies, right? And so invested monies aren't making as much money, so they don't have as much money to give, so they've seen that shrink. It's the same thing in government, right? They've seen that shrink. They get nervous about that. And it seems like, when you hear, I don't know how many of you listen to National Public Radio or BUR, BGBH or whatever, but the advertisements that I hear now for the Boston Foundation, the focus is not on their giving, the focus is on them managing and helping, like if you're a wealthy individual and you want to set up your own fund at the Boston Foundation, they want to work with you and help you do that and help you think about how you might want to give your money. So they're really about managing other people's money now in many ways, and that might be a shift in their business model. It might work for them, but what a statistic that I heard, I don't know if it's true or not, is that 80% of the money that the Boston Foundation gives away every year isn't the Boston Foundation's money, it's family foundations that are giving through the Boston Foundation, but it means that they don't actually have control over 80% of the money they give away. I don't believe that was true 10 years ago. I don't even think it was true probably 5 years ago. And again, that gets back to the economic divide, that a lot of people have either moved here and are wealthy or are getting wealthy and trying to figure out how to, for tax shelter reasons and just for sort of core, charitable reasons, are trying to figure out how to best invest their money, how to give away their money, et cetera. So they're working with places like the Boston Foundation to do so.
Shall we? Hang on. Shall we break up into so that people can get some pitches and things done?
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's better, just given the time.
Yeah, just a quick
there's-
follow-up, was it? Or
I can follow up with you.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah. Anybody
Yeah.
else have any questions?
No? Okay.
Well, awesome.
One
Thank
more
you
time.
very much, madam.
Yeah.
We really
Yep.
appreciate it. Yeah.
No
Thank you.
problem. Thank you.